I was walking into Uniqlo when a random woman grabbed my hand and shouted, "I love you so much." I thought it was a pickpocketing scheme and got ready to push her off, but she whispered, "Please, he's watching." Just for a minute. Something in her desperation made me grip her hand back. "Of course, sweetheart. Sorry I'm late." Her whole body sagged with relief. She was young, extremely skinny, and had dark circles under her eyes. She kept touching her collarbone where I could see bruises under her concealer. A mall security guard approached us, his hand on his radio. I could already tell that he took his job way too seriously. "Miss, is everything all right here?" She laughed, but it came out shaky. "Yes! This is my boyfriend. We just had a silly fight earlier, but we're good now." She stood on her tiptoes and kissed my cheek. Her lips were freezing. "Right, babe?" "Yeah, just a misunderstanding. You know how women are." He nodded slowly and walked away, but I noticed he spoke into his radio as he left. "Thank you," she breathed against my shoulder. I could see her veins pumping with adrenaline. "Can we go somewhere with more people?" I led her to the food court where the crying babies were screaming at the top of their lungs. She inhaled the McDonald's Big Mac like she hadn't eaten in days. "Who are you hiding from?" I kept my voice casual while scanning faces. She twisted a paper napkin in her lap. "Someone who won't accept that it's over." "An ex?" She nodded. "He's older. Like a lot older. Like he's 32. I just turned 18 last month and suddenly realized how messed up everything was." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "He used to say I was mature for my age." Special, I tried to keep a neutral expression so she wouldn't feel judged. "How long have you been together?" 2 years. But it wasn't, he waited until it was legal, mostly. She saw the tears in my eyes. He helped me when no one else would. I was basically homeless at 16, couch surfing, and he gave me a place to stay, a job. I was convinced he was saving me. "Where are your parents?" "Dad's gone. Mom's an addict." She shrugged like it was nothing, but I saw her jaw clench. "He became everything. Taught me about business, bought me clothes, introduced me to important people. Said I'd be nothing without him. He's probably right." Her story made my heart hurt. "When did you leave?" 2 weeks ago. I finally saved enough money to get a motel room, but he has ways of finding me." She pulled out her phone with a cracked screen. I ditched my nice one. He was tracking it. "We should call the police." "No!" She grabbed my wrist so hard her nails dug in. A woman at the next table looked over and she lowered her voice. "You don't understand. He has connections. His best friend is a cop. They all think he's this amazing guy who saved a troubled teen." Her laugh was bitter. "And technically, I did steal from him." "What did you take?" "Myself." She met my eyes. "He says I owe him for everything. 2 years of rent, food, clothes. Calls me his investment." I was pulling out my phone when she went rigid. "Oh no. He's here." "Where?" I didn't see any obvious threats in the food court. "By Subway." Blue button down, checking his phone. Her breathing went shallow. "Don't look directly." I used my peripheral vision to spot a well-dressed man scrolling on his phone, gold watch on his left wrist. Even from here, I could smell expensive cologne wafting over the fried food odors. "We need to move. Now." She was already standing. "Wait. Describe him first, in case we get separated." 6'2", dark hair with some gray at the temples. Always wears a gold Rolex his dad gave him. Never takes it off. Her words tumbled out faster. Has a scar through his left eyebrow from a hockey accident. Cracks his knuckles when he's thinking. Number. No way. My blood was turning to ice water as I slowly recognized each detail. "Anything else?" "He's got help. Someone texts him when they spot me. I've seen him checking his phone right before he shows up." She was pulling me towards the exit, her cold hand surprisingly strong. "We have to go. He'll circle around to cut us off." But I was already doing the math. 2 weeks ago, my brother Damien asked me to keep an eye out. Said there was a troubled teen from his halfway house who might make up stories. Who was confused. Who was ungrateful after everything he'd done. "What did you say his name was?" My voice sounded far away. I didn't. She was backing away from me now, reading something in my expression. "Why?" The girl was at the exit now, ready to bolt. I could have called out to Damien and snitched on her. He'd probably cut me in on the family business expansion he'd been planning. Instead, I walked straight toward him, pulling out my phone. "Damien! Perfect timing, man. How have you been?" He looked up, already fake smiling. Behind him, I saw the girl slip out the exit and disappear into the crowd. His fake smile dropped the second I mentioned catching up over coffee next week. His eyes started scanning the food court while I kept talking about Mom's new garden project and Dad's bad knee. I could see him getting more impatient with each word, but I kept going, asking about his work and mentioning our cousin's wedding coming up. His fingers were tapping against his thigh and his jaw was getting tighter. "Listen, I'm actually looking for someone right now." He finally cut me off. I tilted my head like I was confused. "Oh yeah? Who?" He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo that made my stomach turn. It was the girl, but from maybe 6 months ago, smiling at some fancy restaurant. "She's from my program, one of the troubled teens I help." His voice had that fake concern he was so good at. "She's been making up some pretty wild stories lately. Probably confused from all the drugs." I kept my face neutral while my hands got sweaty. "What kind of stories?" His jaw tightened more and I saw that little vein in his temple start to pulse. "Just confused stuff about our program, nothing important." He was looking past me now, checking every exit. "She needs help though, professional help." I nodded like I understood while watching him crack his knuckles. "That's rough, man. Dealing with kids like that must be hard." He wasn't even listening anymore, just scanning faces. I kept talking about nothing for another 5 minutes, mentioning the game last night and asking about his car. Then another 5 minutes about work stuff and mutual friends. His responses got shorter and shorter until he was just grunting. "Hey, I need to hit the bathroom real quick," I finally said after checking my watch. "You good here?" He was already walking toward the subway, still looking around. "Yeah, I'll check the stores." I walked to the bathroom but kept going past it to the service hallway. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and typed a quick text to the number she'd used earlier. Just one word. Hide. Then I deleted the message from my sent folder. I slipped out through the employee exit near the loading dock and practically ran to my car. The parking garage felt like it went on forever. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped my keys twice before getting the door open. The drive home was a blur of checking my mirrors and trying to process what just happened. My own brother. The same guy who taught me to ride a bike and helped me with homework. The same guy who'd been grooming a 16-year-old kid. My apartment building's parking lot was empty when I pulled in. I sat in my car for 10 minutes just staring at the steering wheel. The girl's face kept flashing in my mind. Those dark circles and the way she'd tensed up when she saw him. How many others had there been? That evening, my phone buzzed with a family group chat notification. Damien had written a long message about his missing client who needed help. He made it sound like she was dangerous to herself, unstable, making up stories about good people who were trying to help her. Mom responded immediately saying she'd keep an eye out and asking if he needed anything. Dad offered to help search tomorrow. My sister sent prayer hands emojis. I felt sick reading it all. Around 9, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. At Greyhound Station downtown, please come alone. I grabbed $300 from my emergency envelope in the freezer and headed out. The mirrors got checked at every red light. Nobody seemed to be following, but I took 3 wrong turns just to be sure. The station was mostly empty except for a few people sleeping on benches. I found her in the back corner booth of the little diner attached to the station. Her hood was up and her shoulders were hunched like she was trying to disappear. She jumped hard when I slid into the seat across from her. Her whole body stayed tense for a second before she recognized me and relaxed just a little bit. The waitress came over and I ordered 2 coffees and a burger for her even though she said she wasn't hungry. She ate the whole thing in about 3 minutes once it arrived. We went to the bathroom and she handed me her phone. I popped the back off and pulled out the SIM card, putting it in a napkin to throw away later. The new prepaid SIM I'd bought at a gas station went in and I handed it back. He probably has tracking apps on everything he gave me, she said quietly. Her backpack, her clothes, probably even her shoes. We'd have to be careful. I drove us to a motel on the edge of town that I'd passed a million times but never really noticed. The kind with weekly rates posted on a faded sign and cars that had been parked in the same spots for months. The clerk barely looked up from his TV when I walked in. I paid cash for 3 nights and signed the register as Mike Johnson with an address I made up on the spot. He slid a key across the counter without asking for ID. The room smelled like old cigarettes and the carpet had stains I didn't want to think about. But it had a deadbolt and a chain, and that was what mattered. She sat on the edge of the bed with her hands folded in her lap. I pulled the desk chair over and sat down facing her. I need to tell you something, I said. My mouth felt dry. Damien is my brother. She went completely still, not even breathing for a second. Then she stood up fast and backed toward the door. Wait, please just listen. She stopped but kept her hand on the doorknob. Why are you helping me if he's your brother? Her voice was barely a whisper. Why would you do that? I looked at the stained carpet and thought about all those Sunday dinners where Damien would talk about his halfway house and how he was helping troubled teens get back on their feet. Mom would beam with pride while he described teaching them life skills and giving them structure. Now I saw it differently, the way he'd always pick kids with no family support, no safety net, nobody who'd come looking if something went wrong. The girl's hand stayed on the doorknob, but she wasn't turning it yet. She pulled out her phone with shaking fingers and showed me screenshots of text messages from Damien, where he'd listed every single thing he'd ever bought her, down to the last pack of gum, with a running total at the bottom that kept growing like she was some kind of inventory he was tracking. The number at the bottom said $38,462. My stomach turned seeing how he'd itemized her life like a business expense. I remembered I still had Travis Keith's number saved from last year, when he'd helped my friend deal with a stalker who kept showing up at her work. Travis worked mall security, and was one of those guys who actually cared about his job instead of just collecting a paycheck. He might have saved the footage from today before Damien could get to it. My phone buzzed right then with a text from Damien asking if I'd seen anything suspicious at the mall today, said he was looking for someone who might be confused and making up stories. I let it sit there unanswered, while the girl watched me with those tired eyes. Hours later, I finally texted him back saying I'd been shopping for jeans in the men's section, and hadn't noticed anything unusual. The next morning, I met the girl at a busy breakfast place downtown where the tables were packed close together, and you could barely hear yourself think over all the conversations. She looked exhausted, but there was something different in her posture, less hunched, and she told me she'd actually slept for 6 straight hours, knowing she had a locked door between her and the world. Over scrambled eggs that she ate slowly instead of inhaling. She explained how Damien would move her to a new apartment whenever she started making friends with neighbors or coworkers, always saying they were bad influences or trying to use her. The isolation happened so gradually she didn't realize until recently that she'd lost everyone, that he'd become her whole world by design. I borrowed a phone from work that afternoon and called a survivor hotline I'd found online, explaining the situation without using any names. The woman who answered had this calm voice that made you feel like everything might actually be okay, and she said her name was Lizette Moulton, and she could meet us tomorrow if we wanted. That night after work, I went through old family photos on my laptop and found what I was looking for in the 4th of July folder from 3 years ago. There was Damien at our parents' barbecue with his arm around a guy in a police uniform, both of them holding beers and grinning at the camera. Camden Shepherd, I remembered now. They'd been friends since high school, and Camden always came to family events like he was an honorary brother. The girl texted me around 10 saying she wanted to go back to Damien's place while he was at work tomorrow to get some of her things, just clothes and maybe her grandmother's necklace he'd kept in his safe. I texted back immediately that it was way too dangerous, that he probably had cameras or neighbors watching and offered to buy her whatever she needed instead. She agreed after some back and forth, and the next afternoon we met at a Target on the other side of town where nobody would recognize us. She stood in the shampoo aisle for almost 20 minutes just staring at all the bottles, and when I asked if she was okay, she started crying right there between the Pantene and the Head & Shoulders. She said she'd never been allowed to pick her own products before, that Damien always decided what shampoo she used, what deodorant, what toothpaste, and now every small choice felt impossible because she didn't know what she actually liked. An older woman gave us a concerned look as she wheeled her cart past, but I just rubbed the girl's back while she wiped her face with her sleeve and tried to breathe normally again. We ended up getting one of everything she thought she might like, filling the cart with bottles and products she'd pick up and study like they were precious artifacts from another world. The whole time I kept checking over my shoulder for anyone who looked like they might be watching us, but it was just regular people doing their regular shopping on a regular Tuesday afternoon. The next morning, Lizette texted the address of a coffee shop downtown with windows facing 3 different streets. I picked up the girl from the motel, and we drove there in silence while she kept checking the side mirror every few seconds. The coffee shop was busy with morning rush customers grabbing their drinks before work, which made it easier to blend in. Lizette was already there at a corner table wearing jeans and a plain sweater that made her look like any other customer. She stood up when she saw us, and her handshake was firm but gentle at the same time. The girl sat with her back to the wall where she could see both exits while I got us all coffee. Lizette pulled out a yellow legal pad and started explaining how these situations usually work without pushing any specific choice on us. She said going to regular cops would probably get back to Camden since cops talk to each other all the time. But she knew other ways to document everything, like taking photos of bruises and keeping copies of texts and emails. The girl told her she wasn't ready for police yet, but wanted to be ready if she changed her mind later. Lizette nodded and said that was completely fine and started talking about safety planning instead. She gave us a list of warning signs to watch for and numbers to call if things got bad. My phone buzzed with notifications from the family group chat where Damien was posting about how hurt he was. He said his client from the program abandoned everything after all he did for her. Dad immediately offered to help look for her, and Mom said she'd ask around at her church. I had to mute the whole conversation before I threw my phone across the room. 2 days later, Travis texted me to meet him at a sports bar near the mall. He showed up with his personal phone and started scrolling through photos he'd saved from the security cameras. The footage showed everything from when the girl first grabbed my hand to when she slipped out the exit. He'd saved it all before the official footage mysteriously corrupted the next day when Damien came asking about it. I gave Travis my backup email that I only used for important stuff, and he sent all the files right there. He mentioned Damien had come back to the mall 3 times asking different guards about the footage. Travis played dumb every time and said the cameras were broken that day, which Damien didn't seem to believe. The girl got an email notification on her old account that she'd set to forward to a new one. It was an official-looking invoice from Julian Burnett, who turned out to be Damien's lawyer. The invoice listed 2 years of housing at market rate plus food and clothing and something called career training. The total at the bottom was $48,000 with a note about payment being due immediately. She started shaking when she read it, and I had to take the phone from her hands. We met with Lizette again the next day, and she brought someone new with her. Josephine Dowling was a lawyer who worked at a legal clinic for survivors, and she looked at the invoice with interest. She said this actually helped our case because it showed financial abuse and control patterns. No judge would enforce a debt from when someone was 16 and being groomed by an adult. She started taking notes about everything while the girl told her story again with more details this time. I reached out to Sergei Golubev through his newspaper email saying I had a story about financial abuse. He called me back within an hour, and we met at a diner outside town where nobody would recognize us. He was interested but said he needed more proof than just our word before his editor would let him run anything. I showed him some of the mall footage on my phone, and his eyes got wider as he watched. He said he'd start digging into Damien's background and his halfway house business to see what else he could find. That night, we were organizing the girl's few things at the motel when she picked up her backpack funny. The weight felt wrong somehow, and she started checking all the pockets and zippers carefully. I grabbed scissors from the desk drawer, and we found a small cut in the lining that had been sewn back up. Inside was an AirTag wrapped in fabric to keep it from making noise when the bag moved. We left it right there on the motel bed and packed everything else into my car immediately. I paid cash for a different motel 20 miles away while she waited in the car with the doors locked. The new place was older and dirtier, but the locks worked and nobody asked questions about anything. She couldn't stop checking her other clothes for more trackers and found nothing else hidden. We threw away the backpack in a dumpster behind a grocery store 5 miles from the new motel. The girl kept touching her neck where the bruises were finally fading to yellow and green. She said Damien always knew where she was no matter how careful she tried to be. Now we knew how he did it and could finally stay hidden from him properly. Travis sent another email saying Damien had tried to bribe him for the footage, but he'd refused. Josephine started putting together paperwork for a restraining order using everything we'd collected so far. Lizette called me that same afternoon saying she'd found a place for the girl outside the city limits. The safe house was in an old farmhouse that looked normal from the outside but had cameras everywhere, and women who took shifts watching the road. They'd all been through something similar, and knew exactly what to look for when someone was checking the place out. The girl packed her few things into a garbage bag while I drove her there in my car with the windows down so we could hear if anyone was following. The coordinator at the house was this older woman with tattoos covering old scars on her arms, who showed us the panic button in every room and the back exit that led straight into the woods. She gave the girl a prepaid phone with only emergency numbers programmed in and made her practice the escape route 3 times until she could do it in the dark. 2 days passed quietly, and I thought maybe we'd gotten away clean, but then Damien showed up at my work right when everyone was heading to lunch. He was doing his charming act for my coworkers and laughing at their jokes while his eyes stayed cold and focused on me. I tried to walk past him to my car, but he followed me into the parking lot still smiling like we were having a friendly chat. "Haven't heard from my investment lately," he said while blocking my driver's door with his body. I pulled out my phone and pretended to check a text while actually hitting record on the voice memo app. He kept talking about how she owed him for everything he'd done and how family should stick together when someone steals from them. His voice stayed casual like he was discussing a business deal instead of a human being, which made my skin crawl as I kept recording. "She's my property until she pays back what she owes," he said clearly into my hidden phone. I told him I hadn't seen her and got in my car while he stood there cracking his knuckles the way the girl had described. That recording went straight to Josephine and Sergei, who both said it was exactly what they needed for their work. Sergei called me the next morning saying he'd verified all the timestamps on the mall footage and confirmed the AirTag was real from the photos we'd taken. He needed one more person to go on record before his editor would let him publish anything about Damien. I was meeting with the girl at a coffee shop near the safe house when she said something that stopped me cold. "I'm a person, not a burden," she said while stirring sugar into her coffee. It was the first time I'd heard her talk about herself like she had value instead of being someone's problem to fix. She mentioned wanting to get her GED and maybe find work at a restaurant where she could earn her own money without depending on anyone. Her whole posture was different, like she was taking up space in the world instead of trying to disappear into corners. We were making real progress until I got home 3 days later and found an official-looking envelope shoved under my door. The letterhead said Julian Burnett, attorney at law, and the pages inside were full of legal threats about defamation and spreading false allegations. It warned me to stop interfering with Damien's business relationships and threatened to sue me for damages if I continued helping the girl spread lies. My hands were shaking as I took pictures of every page and sent them to Josephine, who called me back within minutes. "This is meant to scare you, but it has no legal weight," she said after reading through everything carefully. She explained that they couldn't actually sue me for helping someone escape abuse and started adding the threat letter to our growing pile of evidence. The restraining order paperwork was getting thicker every day with texts and recordings and photos of old bruises that told the real story. That night, the girl remembered something about Damien's scar that changed everything we thought we knew. She was helping me organize evidence when she saw a photo of him and suddenly went pale. "That scar through his eyebrow wasn't from hockey," she said quietly. She explained how he'd hit her one night for talking to a male cashier at the grocery store, and his ring had caught his own face when she'd tried to duck. He'd made her tell everyone it was a hockey injury, and she'd had to smile and nod every time someone asked about it at his work events. We added that to Josephine's files along with the date it happened and which hospital had treated them both that night. Everything was moving forward until the safe house coordinator called me about a problem. A dark sedan had driven past the house 3 times in 1 hour, going slower each time like they were looking for something. The coordinator got the plate number and added it to their security log while moving the girl to a bedroom without windows facing the road. We couldn't prove it was connected to Damien, but the timing was too perfect to be random. Travis finally agreed to help us in a big way when I called him about the sedan. He said he'd go on record with Sergey about the mall footage and how Damien had tried to get it deleted, which would give the reporter enough sources to publish. The story was coming together piece by piece, and Damien couldn't stop it, no matter how many threats his lawyer sent. I picked up my phone that night and dialed Damien's number before I could lose my nerve. He answered on the second ring, sounding annoyed that I was calling so late. I hit record on my other phone and told him straight out that I knew what he'd done to that girl. His voice went cold and quiet, which was always scarier than when he yelled. He said I had no idea what I was talking about, and that the girl was a liar who owed him everything. I pushed harder and said I'd seen the evidence of what he really was. That's when he lost it and started saying how he'd destroy my reputation at work and make sure everyone knew I was helping a thief. He called her his property who needed to pay back what she owed for 2 years of investment. I kept him talking for 5 more minutes while he dug himself deeper with every threat. The next morning, I brought the recording to Josephine's office, where she was already organizing everything into a thick manila folder. She had the text printed out with dates highlighted and the invoice from Julian circled in red marker. The photos of old bruises were arranged by date with medical records from the one time the girl went to urgent care. She added my new recording to a USB drive with the other audio files we'd collected. The AirTag we'd found was sealed in a plastic bag as physical evidence. She said we had enough for a solid restraining order case and probably more. We sat there looking at all the evidence spread across her desk and made the decision together. We'd file the restraining order on Monday, and Sergey would publish his story the same day. No more hiding or playing defense while Damien controlled the narrative. Josephine spent the weekend preparing the paperwork while I helped the girl practice what she'd need to say in court. She filed everything first thing Monday morning and hired process servers to deliver it to Damien at his office building. She specifically told them to serve him in the lobby during lunch hour, when the most people would see it happen. By Wednesday afternoon, Sergey had called Damien's lawyer for comment about his story on financial abuse and grooming. Julian sent back a 3-page response full of legal threats and claims that the girl was mentally unstable. He said she was making up stories for attention and trying to extort money from a respected businessman. Sergey just added the response to his story as another example of intimidation tactics. The court date was set for Friday morning, and we all met at the courthouse early. Camden was already there in the hallway when we arrived, even though he had no official reason to be present. He walked up close and started talking about how dangerous the city was getting and how people needed to be careful. His hand kept touching his hip where his gun would normally be, even though he wasn't in uniform. Lizette stepped right between us and stared him down until he backed away, muttering about just being friendly. Inside the courtroom, Josephine laid out our evidence piece by piece for Judge Fisher. She started with the invoice demanding payment for expenses from when the girl was 16. Then she showed the tracking device and explained how it was hidden in the girl's belongings. The photos of bruises came next with dates that matched text messages about punishment. Finally, she played the recording of Damien calling the girl his property and threatening to destroy my life. Judge Fisher took her time reviewing everything while making notes on a yellow legal pad. When it was the girl's turn to testify, she kept it simple and factual. She listed dates and specific incidents without getting emotional or dramatic. She explained how he controlled her money and wouldn't let her have friends or talk to other people. She described the isolation tactics in clear terms that anyone could understand. Julian stood up to argue that she'd lived with Damien willingly as an adult and owed him for his generosity. He tried to paint it as a simple roommate dispute over unpaid rent. Judge Fisher looked at him over her glasses and asked if he really wanted to argue that an adult man could own a debt from when someone was a 16-year-old child. Julian started to say something about contracts, but the judge cut him off. She granted the temporary restraining order effective immediately and scheduled a review hearing for 3 months out. She looked directly at Damien and warned him that any contact with the girl would result in immediate arrest. She also ordered him to stay 500 feet away from her workplace and any place she might reasonably be expected to be. The bailiff handed Damien the official paperwork while we watched him turn red with anger. Julian whispered something in his ear, and they left without saying another word to anyone. Outside the courthouse, the girl started shaking from all the adrenaline finally hitting her system. We got her to Lizette's car and drove away before Camden could follow us out of the building. The next morning, I woke up to 17 text messages from people I hadn't talked to in years. Sergey's article had gone live at 6 a.m. with a headline about financial abuse disguised as charity work. He didn't use real names but included enough details that anyone who knew Damien would recognize him immediately. The piece described a 32-year-old man who ran a halfway house and targeted vulnerable teens. It mentioned the gold watch that never came off and the scar through the left eyebrow. My phone rang non-stop until I turned it off completely. 3 days later, I heard through a coworker that Camden had been put on desk duty. Someone had filed a formal complaint about him showing up at the courthouse to intimidate witnesses in a case he wasn't even assigned to. Internal Affairs started digging into his friendship with Damien and found years of favors that crossed ethical lines. The girl called me that Friday with actual excitement in her voice for the first time. A restaurant owner had read Sergey's article and reached out through Lizette to offer her a job. She'd start Monday as a prep cook with potential to move up to line cook once she learned the basics. The pay wasn't amazing, but it was honest work with a boss who knew her situation and wanted to help. That weekend, I finally did what I should have done years ago. I blocked Damien on everything, including email, and sent a group message to my family explaining exactly why. Mom called within 10 minutes sobbing about how family should stick together. Dad sent angry texts about betraying blood for strangers. I turned off my phone and spent the weekend watching old movies and eating takeout. Travis emailed me a zip file on Monday with all the mall footage from that first day. He'd made official copies before the system mysteriously crashed and wanted us to have backups just in case. Mall management had started retraining all their security staff on recognizing domestic violence situations after what happened. Time moved differently after that. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months without me really noticing. I focused on work and avoided family gatherings completely. The girl sent occasional updates through Lizette about her progress. She'd gotten into a transitional housing program and moved into a tiny studio apartment. She was working full-time at the restaurant and taking GED classes 3 nights a week. Her boss had promoted her to prep cook after just 6 weeks. 3 months after the hearing, we met at a coffee shop downtown to celebrate. She looked like a completely different person with color in her cheeks and actual muscle on her arms from hauling boxes in the kitchen. She showed me her second paycheck stub from a weekend catering gig she'd picked up. Between both jobs, she'd saved enough for a real security deposit on a regular apartment. Lizette was helping her look at places in safer neighborhoods with better bus routes. We were looking at apartment listings on her phone when she got a call from work. Her manager sounded confused about a flower delivery that had just arrived. The card said they were from someone who missed her and would see her soon. She went completely white and handed me the phone. I could hear her manager reading the card and recognize Damien's handwriting from years of birthday cards. We called Josephine immediately, and she contacted the courthouse. Within 2 hours, police had arrested Damien at his office for violating the restraining order. Camden tried to intervene, but his desk duty status meant he couldn't do anything except watch them take Damien away in handcuffs. The judge scheduled an emergency hearing for the next morning. This time, Damien showed up in an orange jumpsuit with his lawyer looking exhausted. Judge Fisher reviewed the flower shop receipt with Damien's credit card information and the surveillance footage showing him placing the order. She made the restraining order permanent with no possibility of modification for 5 years. She also added 30 days in county jail for the violation with a warning that next time would be 6 months minimum. Julian tried to argue it was just a misunderstanding, but the judge cut him off mid-sentence. She said sending flowers to someone's workplace after being ordered to have no contact showed a deliberate pattern of stalking behavior. Damien's face turned purple, but he kept his mouth shut while the bailiff let him out. The girl started crying in the hallway afterward, but they were relief tears this time. She had a job and an apartment and legal protection that actually meant something. Camden got suspended 2 weeks later when Internal Affairs found evidence he'd been using police resources to track the girl's movements for Damien. My family kept trying to contact me through various relatives, but I held firm on my boundaries. Mom sent a letter saying I destroyed the family, but I threw it away unopened after recognizing her handwriting. The girl graduated from her GED program and enrolled in community college for business classes. She wanted to learn how to run a restaurant properly instead of just working in one. We still meet for coffee sometimes, and she tells me about her classes and her new friends from work. Last week, she showed me her lease for a 1-bedroom apartment in a building with actual security and working locks on all the doors. She'd done it all herself with no help from anyone except the people who believed her story. Well, folks, that's gonna wrap it up for today. Thanks for letting me wonder about all this with you. It's always interesting sharing these thoughts together. Subscribe for more content like this.